It begins with the image of a car, not in motion, not in the place it should be, but sitting eerily against the side of an abandoned farmhouse, its rear bumper pressed into the weather boards, as if someone had backed it there with deliberate force. The driver's side door is unlocked. Inside, a purse is open, a few coins scattered. A water bottle rests in the console. On the ground nearby, a single pair of sunglasses, left behind as though dropped in a hurry. This was a scene that greeted a Vermont State Police trooper on the morning of March 20th, 2004, a tableau that would spark one of the state's most haunting mysteries. The car belonged to 17-year-old Brianna Maitland, a high school junior who had been working toward her GED. The night before, she had clocked out from her shift at the Black Lantern Inn in Montgomery and stepped out into the cool March air, telling coworkers she was heading home. She never arrived. The search for Brianna would stretch across decades, weaving through rumors of drug trafficking, whispered confessions, and names of dangerous men who moved in Vermont's shadowy corners. And yet, after all the interviews, all the tips, and all the evidence tested, the truth of what happened to her remains elusive. To understand the weight of this case, you need to know who Brianna was, not just a missing girl on the flyer, but the person she was becoming. Friends describe her as adventurous, independent beyond her years, and not afraid to push boundaries. She had a free spirit, but also a stubborn streak, one that sometimes pulled her toward risky situations. At 17, she was balancing school, work, and the complicated relationships that come with the tail end of adolescence. On the morning of her disappearance, Brianna had taken her GED exam, a step toward her plans for the future. She celebrated briefly with a friend before heading to her mother's home to change for work. But something happened that afternoon, something that would later seem like a faint signal of trouble. Her mother recalled that while they were together, Brianna stepped outside, took a phone call, and returned visibly shaken. She left in a hurry, saying she needed to get ready for her shift. That evening, she worked as usual at the Black Lantern Inn, a small but well-known local restaurant. Staff later said she seemed fine, maybe a little tired, but not distressed. When the shift ended, she left alone, climbing into her green 1985 Oldsmobile and driving off into the night. From there, the timeline fractures. Somewhere along the short route toward her friend's house, where she had been staying at the time, Brianna vanished. The next morning, the Oldsmobile was found backed into the side of the long-abandoned Dutchburn farmhouse, less than a mile from the restaurant. To those who saw it, the positioning of the car looked deliberate. Investigators couldn't tell if Brianna had been trying to turn around, if she had been forced there, or if someone else had staged it after the fact. In those first hours, the sight of the car alone was enough to set nerves on edge. Abandoned vehicles can sometimes be signs of mechanical trouble or accidents. But here, in the dim morning light, with no Brianna in sight and her belongings left behind, it felt different. It felt wrong. At first, Brianna's disappearance didn't set off the alarms it should have. Friends assumed she had taken off for a day or two, maybe to clear her head or spend time with someone without telling anyone. 17-year-olds sometimes did that, but those closest to her knew this was different. She wasn't answering her phone. She didn't show up for work. And her family knew something was wrong. When police arrived at the farmhouse that first morning, they did what they could to preserve the scene. The Oldsmobile was still in working order, keys missing but gear shift in neutral, doors unlocked. They noted the placement of the belongings, her purse, her ATM card, a few items of clothing. To some, it looked like she'd been interrupted mid-action. By the time Brianna's family realized she was gone, nearly 24 hours had already passed. That gap, that yawning stretch of unaccounted for time, would become one of the most painful elements of the case. Witnesses could only recall fragments. Someone driving by late that night saw the Oldsmobile against the barn and assumed it had been there for hours. Another person thought they saw a light-colored vehicle parked nearby. Nothing concrete. The search started small. A few officers, some family friends, calls to hospitals. Then it grew. State police canvassed the roads, combed through the fields, checked the woods. But there were no signs of struggle, no footprints in the mud, no tire tracks that could be tied to another vehicle. In the weeks that followed, theories began to surface. Montgomery was a small place, but not untouched by crime. The region had seen its share of drug activity, and Brianna was known to have acquaintances in circles that brushed up against that world. Authorities didn't leap to conclusions, but they couldn't ignore the possibility that her disappearance was connected to people who lived outside the law. Then there was a phone call her mother had witnessed the day she vanished, the one that left her rattled. No one knew who had been on the other end of the line, but it became one of the first mysteries investigators hoped to solve. If they could trace that conversation, maybe they could trace Brianna's last movements. The family, meanwhile, held on to hope. Flyers went up. Local news ran her story. And the image of the Oldsmobile against the Dutchburn farmhouse burned into the public's mind, not just as a clue, but as a symbol of absence. But the truth is, the night of March 19th, 2004, was one of those nights that, in hindsight, feels like it was carrying a storm long before clouds ever broke. Brianna had finished her GED test earlier that day, a step she'd been working toward with quiet determination. Friends described her as upbeat that afternoon, proud of herself, almost relieved to have one piece of her future squared away. And yet, there was an undercurrent, something quieter, a tension that not everyone noticed. After the test, she ran errands, visited friends, and eventually made her way to the Black Lantern Inn, where she worked part-time. Her shift ended around 11:20 p.m. She clocked out, exchanged a few words with her coworkers, and stepped into the cold Vermont night. What happened in the hours, or maybe even the minutes that followed, is still the question that has haunted this community for more than 2 decades. The last confirmed sighting of her alive was in the parking lot of the inn, as she got into her green 1985 Oldsmobile. And then, nothing. No one saw her driving. No one saw her pull into a gas station. No one saw her make it home. By the next morning, that Oldsmobile will be found in one of the most unsettling crime scene setups Vermont law enforcement had ever faced. It was backed into an old, dilapidated farmhouse just off Route 118 in Montgomery, the kind of abandoned property locals knew by sight but never visited. The rear bumper of Brianna's car was pressed into the side of the house at an odd angle, as if it had been intentionally placed there. One headlight was broken. Inside, her wallet, her driver's license, paychecks, and other personal belongings were still there, as if she'd just stepped out for a moment. But Brianna wasn't. There were no signs of a struggle in the immediate area. No blood. No shoe prints in the mud. Just a car lodged against an abandoned building, facing the wrong way, with no driver. It was, from the very start, the kind of scene that felt staged, like someone wanted this to be found exactly as it was. The farmhouse quickly became a focal point, not just for police, but for the dozens of people who would later drive by, staring at it in uneasy silence. The image of that car against the peeling wood siding became a symbol of her disappearance. A still photograph burned into the minds of everyone in the region. At first, the reaction was confusion, not alarm. When a Vermont State Police trooper arrived that morning, the car was towed. It wasn't yet considered a crime scene. People assumed Brianna might have left it there temporarily, or maybe she'd had an accident and gone to get help. But as hours turned into days, and Brianna didn't turn up, the sense of unease deepened. It wasn't like her to disappear. She was only 17, and despite recent independence, she still had close ties to friends and family. When her parents, Bruce and Kelly Maitland, learned about the abandoned car, the reality hit hard. Something was wrong. From there, the case shifted quickly into a suspected foul play investigation. Leads began to trickle in, some credible, others pure speculation. The location of the farmhouse itself fueled theories. It wasn't far from known drug activity in the area. In 2004, Montgomery and nearby towns had their share of low-level dealers and dangerous connections. Brianna had acquaintances in those circles. Some say through friends, others say through her own brief experimentation with drugs. Whether those connections played a role in her disappearance remains one of the case's central questions. Even early on, witnesses began to emerge with strange accounts. One said they'd seen a vehicle parked nose-to-nose with Brianna's Oldsmobile late that night, hazard lights flashing. Another claimed they drove past hours later and saw the car exactly as police found it, but with no one nearby. Some people speculated she might have been abducted after a confrontation. Others believed the placement of the car meant she'd been lured there by someone she knew, under the guise of meeting up, only to be overpowered. When investigators processed the Oldsmobile more thoroughly, they recovered DNA. At the time, the technology wasn't what it is today. It was stored, logged, but didn't lead to an immediate match. Brianna's parents pressed for more testing, more public attention. The image of that car, the farmhouse, and the absence of their daughter became a recurring feature on missing persons flyers and local news segments. But in those first few weeks, despite some media attention, the case remained frustratingly stagnant. Every potential lead seemed to split into two paths, one that led nowhere, and one that raised even more questions than it answered. Years later, the DNA would resurface as a critical point of hope. But in 2004, it was just another piece of evidence in a growing file that no one yet knew how to solve. As the days turned into weeks, the farmhouse scene transformed from a silent roadside oddity into a place that seemed almost haunted. People would slow their cars as they passed, craning their necks for one more look, as if the peeling paint and sagging roofline might somehow whisper what had happened there. For Brianna's family, those drives past the site weren't a morbid curiosity. They were a form of torture. Every glance at that spot was a reminder that somewhere between the Black Lantern Inn and that abandoned building, something had gone horribly, irreversibly wrong. Detectives began pulling at every thread they could find. There were names, local figures known to law enforcement, that kept appearing in whispers and rumors. One was a small-time drug dealer with a reputation for sudden violence. Another was a woman rumored to have had an altercation with Brianna just weeks before she vanished. The problem wasn't a lack of suspects. It was the absence of hard evidence. Without a body, without a witness willing to speak on record, every theory lived in the gray space between speculation and proof. The investigation also had to wrestle with timing. Brianna had been living somewhat independently, bouncing between friends' homes and part-time work, which meant that in the critical first hours after she went missing, no one had a complete picture of her movements. The delay in realizing she was in danger had cost investigators precious time that might have preserved tire tracks, footprints, or surveillance footage. By the time her disappearance was treated as a likely abduction, those traces had already been swallowed by Vermont's early spring weather and the ordinary rhythms of rural life. Then there were the alleged sightings. Over the next year, reports came in from places as close as Burlington and as far as New York. People swore they'd seen a young woman matching Brianna's description in convenience stores, bus stations, or walking along remote roads. Each tip brought a spark of hope, but one by one, they fizzled. Either the sighting couldn't be verified, or it turned out to be another person entirely. Still, the patter of these claims added a surreal layer to the case. The possibility, however faint, that Brianna might still be alive somewhere, trapped in a situation she couldn't escape. In the midst of this, the Vermont State Police made a public appeal. They released the image of the Oldsmobile against the farmhouse in the hope that it would jog someone's memory. The photograph was chilling. The green paint of the car faded against the weathered gray boards of the house, the whole scene bathed in the cold, flat light of an early morning. If you saw this vehicle on the night of March 19th or in the early hours of March 20th, an investigator urged on camera, "We need you to come forward." But the phone line stayed mostly quiet. The silence was deafening. And then, an anonymous tip. A person came forward with an affidavit describing, in disturbing detail, what they claimed had happened to Brianna. According to the account, she had been attacked by multiple individuals over a drug-related dispute, her body disposed of in a remote location. The description was graphic, the kind that makes you pause and question whether it could possibly be true. But law enforcement faced the same hurdle they'd encountered from the beginning. The tip couldn't be corroborated. Without physical evidence or a credible witness willing to testify, the affidavit became just another unconfirmed theory in a case already heavy with them. By now, Brianna's name was circulating in the same breath as other missing persons cases in New England. Some even speculated about links to serial offenders, including Israel Keyes, whose travels through Vermont roughly overlapped with the time of her disappearance. But when investigators dug into that angle, nothing concrete connected him to her. It was as though every promising lead dissolved upon closer inspection, leaving nothing but the cold fact that a 17-year-old had vanished into thin air. The years kept passing. Her parents marked birthdays without her, holidays without her, anniversaries of the day she was last seen. Each March, the farmhouse and the photograph of her car would resurface in the media, a grim reminder of the unanswered question that still hung in the air. Where's Brianna Maitland? By the 10th anniversary of her disappearance, the case file had grown thick. Hundreds of pages of reports, interviews, and photographs. But the most crucial pages, the ones with answers, remained unwritten. Detectives came and went, each inheriting the same haunting puzzle. Some admitted privately that they still thought about the case long after their shifts ended, unable to shake the image of that car, perfectly positioned as though it had been placed there deliberately or abandoned in panic. In 2022, there was finally a tremor in the long stillness. Forensic testing, using advances that hadn't existed in 2004, revealed that DNA from Brianna's vehicle matched 11 people whose profiles were already in the system. It was a breakthrough, but an incomplete one. The identity wasn't released to the public, and officials would not say whether that person was a suspect, a witness, or merely someone with an innocent reason to have been in the car. The announcement was careful, restrained. One investigator described it only as a step forward. For Brianna's family, it was both a ray of light and a reminder of how far they still were from the truth. Meanwhile, the farmhouse where a car was found fell deeper into decay. The boards rotted, the roof sagged, and eventually the entire structure was demolished. But for those who remember the case, the spot where it once stood remained a landmark, not of history, but of absence. Locals would still point to the empty patch of ground and say, "That's where they found her car." Time could erase the building, but not the story. Investigators continued to revisit old witnesses, hoping that the passage of years might loosen tongues that had stayed silent out of fear or loyalty. Sometimes, people who had nothing to do with the case would come forward, simply unable to live with what they'd heard secondhand. These scraps of testimony were logged, cross-referenced, and evaluated, but rarely did they lead anywhere solid. It was as if a wall of secrecy surrounded Brianna's fate, and every attempt to break through left only hairline cracks. The FBI joined forces with Vermont State Police, offering a $40,000 reward for information leading to a resolution. Billboards went up. The official campaign framed Brianna not as a statistic, but as a daughter, a sister, and a friend who deserved to come home. In interviews, her mother described her as a little quirky, independent, and deeply loved. It was these glimpses of her personality, the way she laughed, the plans she had for the future, that made the crime feel all the more senseless. Still, no one claimed the reward. No one made the call that would end the search. And in the absence of answers, theories flourished like weeds. Some were grounded in logic. Others spiraled into conspiracy. Was she the victim of a targeted act over a personal dispute? Was she in the wrong place at the wrong time, crossing paths with someone dangerous? Or was the truth something even stranger, buried beneath layers of small-town politics and fear? Every possibility seemed to bend back to the same unshakable fact. On a cold March night in 2004, Brianna Maitland left her job, drove her car to an uncertain destination, and never made it home. Her trail ended at the edge of that farmhouse. And from there, it simply vanished. Over the years, whispers about what really happened to Brianna have grown louder in certain corners of the community. They are rarely spoken in public, but in quiet kitchens, dimly lit bars, or in the back booths of diners, pieces of stories have been passed along, altered, embellished, or stripped bare depending on who tells them. Some claim they know for certain who was responsible. Others say they've heard the names, but that those names belong to people who are still alive, people who would not hesitate to silence anyone who spoke too much. This fear, whether justified or not, has been one of the greatest obstacles in the investigation. One thread investigators could never fully untangle was Brianna's connection to a circle of individuals involved in local drug activity. Vermont, though known for its rural quiet and postcard scenery, has long battled an undercurrent of narcotics trafficking. Authorities looked at whether Brianna had inadvertently crossed paths with someone within that network, someone who viewed her as a threat or who acted out of unpredictable violence. There were hints of unpaid debts, of disputes, of dangerous acquaintances. None of it rose to the level of a clear, prosecutable lead, but it all contributed to the shadowy environment surrounding her disappearance. Then there was the anonymous affidavit, a chilling and signed statement that painted a picture too disturbing to ignore. In its pages, the writer claimed first-hand knowledge of what had happened to Brianna, describing her alleged final moments in grim, violent detail. But without a verified source, and without physical evidence to support it, the affidavit could not serve as more than a haunting piece of hearsay. Detectives read it, archived it, and moved forward, knowing that in the world of unsolved crimes, words are plentiful, but truth is rare. Even more unsettling were the claims that link Brianna's case to one of America's most notorious serial killers, Israel Keyes. Keyes, whose confirmed crimes span across the United States, was known to travel widely, to stalk his victims methodically, and to leave behind almost no trace. Some amateur sleuths suggested that Keyes could have been in the area at the time, and that Brianna's disappearance fit his cold, calculated style. Federal agents examined the theory, but never found conclusive proof. The idea lingered, feeding the sense that her case might be connected to something much larger or much darker than anyone initially realized. Yet, amid all these leads, none had the power to bridge the gap between speculation and certainty. Year after year, the same evidence sat in storage, her clothes, her belongings from the car, DNA samples taken and retaken, waiting for the one piece that would make it all fall into place. Detectives, both retired and active, admit that the case still gnaws at them, as if somewhere in those files, the truth is waiting to be recognized. For her family, the passing years have been a cruel balancing act, holding on to hope while bracing for the possibility that the answers, when they come, may be worse than they've imagined. In public statements, her mother has remained graceful but candid. "We can't bring her back," she once said softly, "but we can still bring her home." It's that distinction between knowing she's gone and knowing where she is that has kept them searching. Some cases grow cold because no one cares. This is not one of them. This is a case that stays cold because the truth has been hidden, either by design or by chance, for more than 2 decades. And as the anniversary approaches each year, the same question hangs in the air, unanswered, unsoftened by time. What happened to Brianna Maitland? The night of March 19, 2004, has been retold countless times in police reports, news broadcasts, internet forums, and whispered conversations between strangers. But the truth is, the timeline is still built on fragments. Witness accounts, small certainties, large gaps. She left the Black Lantern in around 11:20 p.m. That much is fact. She was driving her green 1985 Oldsmobile, the one her friends say she was proud of despite its age. There's no confirmed sighting of her after that moment. Not on surveillance cameras. Not in eyewitness statements that could be verified beyond doubt. The next thing we know is the morning after, when her car is found. That car, awkwardly backed into the abandoned Dutchburn farmhouse, became the most chilling visual in the case. It wasn't just where it was parked, but how. Reverse into a building. Rear bumper pressed up against the wall. Driver's side door unlocked. 2 paychecks still inside. Her wallet. Her contact lenses. All signs of someone who did not intend to be away from her vehicle for long, and yet never came back. For investigators, that farmhouse wasn't just a backdrop. It was a crime scene in waiting. They scoured the area, hoping to find footprints, tire tracks, discarded items that could lead them somewhere. But the scene had been contaminated by curiosity seekers, people who stopped to gawk at the car before police were even called. That contamination meant that whatever trace evidence might have been there may already have been trampled underfoot or blown away. There was something about the positioning of the car that felt staged. Some officers speculated it was meant to send a message, the kind of symbolic placement you see in drug-related warnings or intimidation tactics. Others believed it could have been panic, that maybe Brianna had been taken by surprise, forced to stop there, and her abductor had simply left the car in the fastest, clumsiest way possible. Both theories had merit. Neither could be proven. And then came the DNA. In 2022, years after the trail had gone cold, investigators revealed they had matched DNA found in or around the car to one of 11 individuals tested in connection to the case. But they did not release the name. They did not announce an arrest. That silence spoke volumes. Either the DNA belonged to someone they could not yet tie to the crime, or to someone they could not risk revealing. In small towns, secrets are currency, and this case has proven that some secrets are so valuable or so dangerous. They are kept for decades. The deeper investigators went, the more the case became entangled in the undercurrent of rural Vermont's darker side, a side not seen in postcards or ski brochures. Brianna, by all accounts, was not a reckless girl. She had dreams, plans, and a quiet determination. But she also moved in circles that brushed against people with dangerous reputations. Friends admitted, some reluctantly, that she had connections to local drug activity, not as a dealer, but as someone who knew people in that world. In small towns, those lines blur quickly. A ride home from work, a party after hours, a friend of a friend. It doesn't take much to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The possibility of a drug-related dispute emerged early. There were whispers about debts owed, about confrontations that turned violent, about people who wanted to send a warning. The placement of her car, half hidden, half displayed, seemed to reinforce that theory. If it was a warning, it was effective. People close to Brianna suddenly became very careful about what they said, and to whom. Fear can be a silencer far more powerful than loyalty. Then came the sightings. Over the months and years that followed, people claimed to have seen her in New York, in Montreal, even in Las Vegas. Each report brought a flash of hope, quickly extinguished by the reality that none of them could be verified. Witness descriptions were vague, timelines didn't match, and no physical evidence ever surfaced to back them up. And yet, there was one lead that haunted investigators, an anonymous affidavit that described, in gruesome detail, Brianna's alleged fate. It painted a picture of violence, of her being held against her will, of a final act that left no room for hope. But without corroboration, it remained what it was, a haunting story from the shadows, unproven and uncharged. There were also darker, more sensational possibilities. The name Israel Keyes surfaced in online discussions. The serial killer known for his meticulous planning, his ability to kill without leaving a trace. His confirmed crimes place him far from Vermont, but his history of extensive travel left just enough possibility to keep the theory alive. Law enforcement, however, found no evidence tying him to Brianna. Still, the speculation clung to the case, fueled by the chilling idea that she might have crossed paths with someone who had killed before and would kill again. Years passed. Leads dried up. The farmhouse, once a silent witness, eventually burned to the ground, taking with it any lingering chance of new physical evidence. The image of her car backed into that building became a permanent fixture in the public memory, a frozen moment that seemed to taunt investigators and haunt her family. Through it all, the $40,000 reward from the FBI and Vermont State Police remained on the table, a standing offer for the truth. But the truth, in this case, has proven to be more elusive than anyone could have imagined. By the time nearly 2 decades had passed since that cold March night, the people who had been teenagers alongside Brianna were now adults with families of their own. Some moved away, trying to leave behind the whispers and the unspoken knowledge of what might have happened. Others stayed in Vermont, carrying the quiet burden of unanswered questions. For her parents, Bruce and Kelly Maitland, the years did not dull the pain. If anything, time sharpened it. They often spoke about the torment of not knowing, of waking each morning to the same gnawing question. Is she alive somewhere, or is she gone forever? Bruce once said in a televised interview that some mornings, I wake up thinking maybe today is the day, and by nightfall I'm back where I started. That kind of limbo, he explained, is its own form of cruelty. Without a body, there's no closure. Without charges, there's no justice. And without answers, there's no peace. Then, in 2022, something stirred in the case that reignited hope. Advances in DNA technology led to a breakthrough. A sample recovered from Brianna's car years earlier was finally matched to one of 11 individuals tested in connection with the investigation. Law enforcement was careful with its words, confirming only that the DNA belonged to someone known to investigators. The public was left to wonder, was this person a witness, an acquaintance, or something more sinister? Even with this new information, no arrest followed. Prosecutors insisted they needed more, and investigators quietly pressed forward. But for the public, The news was both a relief and a frustration, proof that someone had been in or near Brianna's car, yet still no one was held accountable. Theories remained divided. Some believed she was taken by someone she knew, possibly as an act of revenge or intimidation, and that her remains were hidden in Vermont's dense forests or remote farmland. Others clung to the belief she had left voluntarily, perhaps to escape a dangerous situation, and had chosen never to come back. And then there were those who leaned toward the darkest possibility, that Brianna had been the victim of an opportunistic predator, her disappearance as random as it was tragic. The Vermont State Police, the FBI, and the Maitland family's private investigators have all agreed on one point. This case is solvable. Someone out there knows the truth. Whether the neighbor, an old friend, or a passerby who saw something that night, the answer is likely not buried in some distant city or far-off theory. It's here, in the quiet corners of the Green Mountain State. And so, the case of Brianna Maitland remains suspended, a story frozen in time, marked by a car backed into a crumbling farmhouse, a handful of chilling leads, and the unshakable sense that the truth lies just out of reach. For now, her disappearance sits in that rare and haunting place between mystery and tragedy, where every detail could be the key or just another fragment in a puzzle no one has yet been able to solve. Nearly 20 years on, the abandoned farmhouse where Brianna's Oldsmobile was found still stands, weathered and sagging, its paint peeled and its windows clouded with dust. For locals, it's become more than just a structure. It's a silent witness, a haunting monument to the night everything changed. Passers-by slow their cars when they drive past, some casting quick glances, others looking away entirely. The place seems to carry its own chill, as though the air around it remembers what happened. For a family, the absence is felt in 1,000 small ways. Birthdays with one chair too many. Christmas mornings without her laughter. Every gathering marked by the ache of someone missing. Her mother has often said it's the in-between moments that hurt the most. Setting the table, folding laundry, catching a glimpse of a girl in town with the same build or the same color hair. In those fleeting seconds, hope rushes back in, before reality catches up. Investigators remain cautious but determined. Every so often, they renew public appeals for information, emphasizing that no piece of evidence is too small. In one such plea, an officer noted that, after all this time, loyalty fades, relationships change, and people talk. It was both a warning and an invitation. If anyone had been silent out of fear or protection, now was the time to come forward. The $40, 000 reward still stands. It's a large sum in a rural state like Vermont, and yet it hasn't been enough to break the silence. Whether that's because no one knows or because someone knows too much, remains the most haunting question of all. And so, the case continues, not cold, not forgotten, but waiting for the moment when the right detail falls into place, when the truth that has been hiding in plain sight finally comes to light. Because cases like this, no matter how much time passes, have a way of resurfacing. Secrets unravel. Mistakes are made. People slip. Somewhere out there, there's a person who holds the missing piece. They might not even realize the value of what they know. Or perhaps they know all too well, and have carried that knowledge like a shadow for years. Until that moment comes, Brianna's story remains open-ended. The farmhouse still stands, the mountains still loom, and the unanswered questions still echo across the quiet Vermont nights. And for those who knew her, and for those who never did, but feel her absence nonetheless, the hope endures that one day, this case will no longer be a mystery whispered in the dark, but a chapter finally closed, with justice written in its last lines.